Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Life Science Rundown. This is Nicholas Capman with the FDA Group. Before we jump into our discussion for today, just a little bit about the FDA Group. We help life science companies in the areas of quality assurance, regulatory affairs, clinical operations, commissioning, qualification, and validation, as well as pharmacovigilance. We offer three different engagement models, which are consulting, staff augmentation, and full-time employee recruitment. So if you ever find yourself in need, just head over to thefdagroup.com to check us out and get in touch. So today I am speaking with David Festa. Hello, David.
Hey Nick, how are you today?
I am doing well. How about yourself?
Doing well.
All right. Thank you for joining me today. Before we get into the discussion, would you please introduce yourself?
Absolutely. Thanks, Nick. My name is David Festa. I work for Thermo Fisher Scientific. I am the Director of Corporate Quality, focusing primarily on global supplier quality management across our entire organization.
Okay, excellent. So what are we talking about today?
So today we're talking about auditing and really looking at kind of the pharmaceutical and med device landscape and just understanding, are we auditing too much? And do we have the right folks auditing
Hmm.
our suppliers and our supply base?
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. Are we auditing too much? Where does that question come from?
So, in looking at, obviously today's landscape and understanding, are the when we're putting together audit schedules and when we're really looking to understand how we're evaluating and monitoring our suppliers, a lot of the discussions a lot of times will default back to, well, we need to do an audit, and then we look at it and with our kind of growing constraints kind of in businesses, does it make sense that we're always going to visit suppliers that are producing good product on time and really not giving us a lot of risk? We do need to balance a lot in understanding the products that they're giving us, but if a supplier is performing well, is there a need to do an on-site audit?
Hmm. And if there is, how often, I would assume.
Right. And a lot of times when we're taking a look at this, we're trying to understand on more on an exception based model
Mm,
and understanding, excuse me, where does it make sense to deploy our resources? And
mm,
when we do deploy our resources, are we sending the right people? And
mm.
that's really a really key conversation that we have constantly.
I want to talk about the right people. Before we get into that, you said exception based.
Hmm.
And, the thing that kind of comes into my mind is risk based. So
Hmm.
how does exception based and risk based kind of connect?
Yeah, so when we're taking a look at suppliers and we really want to look at them in kind of really two different aspects, it really is understanding the supplier, the profile, the organization, their quality management system, and then the product, and really how do those two, work together to provide, a good, strong relationship, vendor or customer supplier relationship. And really understanding, risk based, we're going to understand, where the supplier is located, what their system is, what spend we are of them, are we 50% of their revenues? But then we're looking at the material risk and understanding the product risk of what they are providing to us. And that's a very key part to that. So, when we're looking at it, we're looking at the risk of that supplier and then we're looking at the risk of the material. But again, we when you overlap that with performance and how does that all work together, right?
Mm,
So when we're trying to piece those those things together, we want to understand the full picture. So yeah, we have our risk. We understand, yes, they're a very important supplier, a very risky supplier, or we need to keep an eye on them, and the material is very important to our end product and to the customer or to the patient. But when we're looking at exception, so when you look at performance, are they performing well? Are they meeting requirements? Are they meeting, all of the regulations and the standards? And sometimes that's a no, and that's really going to be the part that's really going to get you in trouble down the road.
mm. Now, the risk-based approach is, not very new. However, as we're kind of discussing this topic, I want to know, are you coming at this from an angle of there's been an evolution as to how we need to look at these things, or are you saying there's a better way of doing it?
Honestly, Nick, I think it's a combination of two of the of those two items, kind of looking at the evolution, because as when ISO and the QMR kind of came into being, it really was, we need to audit suppliers, and we need to go on a very regular basis and make sure that we are there as supplier quality. Whereas I think over time we've understood that there's a lot of other constraints coming in on supplier quality, or on quality, and when you're evaluating suppliers, and it's not just being able to go to every single supplier. So first you really need to kind of choose who you're going to go visit. But it really has come down to, again, how well are you monitoring those suppliers? Do you have the right metrics in place? Do you have the right KPIs in place to understand their performance? And then in the big picture, how strong is your supply base? Really understanding where should you focus your resources, your limited resources in a lot of cases, on those right suppliers, on who you choose to go to, um, to address issues. Again, I go back to, if they're performing and they're giving you good product on time, and they're stable, and they haven't changed their manufacturing location, they haven't changed their process, they haven't changed
Hmm.
anything significant, is there a need to go?
Let's say there isn't a need to go this year. And they're because of their performance and
Mhm.
everything, staying consistent. You can you completely write them off, or do you have to put them on a so often every so many year schedule? What would you recommend?
That gets you into a lot of trouble sometimes. And what happens a lot of times is, you might actually say, okay, we're going to go visit every 2 years, we're going to go
Mm,
visit every 3 years. And a lot of times there might not be a need, but your SOPs and your requirements say that you need to. And
right,
now all of a sudden you're out of compliance. And when
right,
you, when the inspector comes in and says, show me your schedule. Oh, you didn't go. There's a non-conformance.
right.
So really understanding, what are those key indicators that should that could prompt a discussion if you should be going,
Mm.
or is it heightened inspections on the inbound? Is it, rather than just a review of their CFC or C of A, are you actually doing some product testing, in certain cases? So there are other ways to ensure that they're still meeting compliance in an ongoing basis as well.
There's a difference between quality and compliance, and the way that you're looking at it is from a quality standpoint is my perspective. But as you mentioned, there's the compliance aspect. So I would imagine that there's even if somebody is not high risk, and we've talked about everything as it pertains to that, is there a minimum that you need to at least go out and see them so that you can stay compliant?
Yeah, and so when we take a look at that, Nick, I mean, when they're obviously in the supplier lifecycle management, right? There's kind of the onboarding, the supplier selection, evaluation, and that
Hmm.
initial onboarding,
Right.
and then sustaining model.
Right.
In that sustaining model, so we really look at those very differently.
Okay.
So when you're going to a supplier and understanding when you're initially onboarding, 100% absolutely agree, you should be going,
Hmm.
because, and this goes into that skill set of supplier that we can get into in just a little bit. But when you're looking at the sustaining model, any one of your suppliers can actually shut down your manufacturing line. It could be that you don't have the screws, or the screws are made out of the wrong materials, and they're part of your assembly, or they're the wrong size. That's going to shut down just as much as that PC board that's coming in the door that doesn't work, or
Mm.
that has the issues that come in with it. So when we're looking at our supply base, we're looking at it holistically. And when again you go back to that exception basis, so who is the supplier that is really, um, affecting your inbound product, and then with that your outbound product, and then to your customers, and then producing, giving you revenue.
I'm going to push back on you, David. What is the minimum?
So that is great question, Nick. But I think one of the key things, I mean, it is really your company's tolerance. At what point, do you say, okay, we're gonna, because of the poor yields of this supplier, we're gonna add, inventory just to cover those gaps and cover those issues. So it really comes down to the individual cases with companies, and really, what's your risk tolerance?
So let me insert my opinion. Um, I agree with everything you've said. With that, I think you have to visit your supplier at least once every 3 years. Tell me that you agree or tell me you disagree.
I disagree.
Okay, go for it.
I think, and again, it comes down to how robust your monitoring system is and how well you know those suppliers and how well you've built in those service level agreements or the KPIs that you agree with. And does depend on the supplier. When we talk about onboarding, where do they fall in those different tiers? And you're going to manage them differently. So there are, if unless, and again, it's those key items that might change that can prompt the discussion to go.
Two questions. What do you think about remote or desk audits to address that compliance aspect? And let me create a situation. Let's say the FDA comes in and you have not visited this client site in 5 years. How do you respond to that?
So let me address the first question first. Remote or document audits. I understand the need. Yeah, I mean, I understand that there's times when you do need to understand the system, the supplier system a little bit deeper than what's just on a supplier questionnaire. So you might need to interact with them and then kind of have that face to face and really understand, so remote being, there would be something that you and I are talking, or we're having a conversation about your system, and then you're able to display that versus a document system where I'm saying, hey, Nick, can you just email me your 17 SOPs and I'll go through them. And if I have questions, I'll come back to you. So I tend to like when we're looking at those, I tend to like the remote because it's that conversation. It's that feeling, if you will, for lack of a better term, that you're getting when you're talking to a supplier. When you go on site, an auditor and some of the skill set that we're talking about, the kind of the evolution of the skill set is what level of control does that supplier have over their manufacturing process? And that's not something that you can get through reading SOPs. That's
Right.
not something that, and it's very difficult to do it remotely. But although, when you're looking at somebody, when you're talking with somebody, you can read the body language. You can understand, are they running around? Are they struggling to get the records? Are they struggling to provide you answers in under control? So of the two, I really, on site to me makes the best sense. You see their housekeeping.
I
You
agree, but let me interrupt. So the thing I love about your perspective is you're truly quality focused and you're not the way that you're approaching this is not to check the box,
Mhm.
right? You really care about the quality and making sure that the supplier is, in a compliant state. With that said, there is the necessary evil of
Mhm.
compliance, and you've got to check the box as much as you want to just focus on
Mhm.
quality. So I'll let you continue, and then I want to hear your response to when the FDA comes in.
Okay, yeah, absolutely. But and it does go back to what we were talking about too. It's how strong your supplier selection and evaluation process is up front. The more work that you're doing up front is better. Obviously, if you're just checking the box and you're onboarding them via a supplier questionnaire, you're going to expect that there's going to be gaps in understandings. So that when we differentiate supplier onboarding and selection versus sustaining, there is definitely a difference between those. So my point is absolutely you need to have a strong supplier selection and evaluation process in order to onboard those suppliers. Now that process is not done in a vacuum. That process is done with our other functions within the organization, our procurement functions, our ES&G, our sustainability, our finance, our legal. All of those different folks need to make sure that they have essentially an understanding or a say within that. Then you get to sustaining, and that's where that whole monitoring and understanding the KPIs and those factors. Now you have the FDA come in, and the inspector asks, okay, show me, have you been to this supplier? And if our procedures say every 3 years, well, damn it, we better show that we've been there every
But it
3 years.
doesn't for
And
this situation. It doesn't.
and it doesn't.
Yep.
But we might say, if we look at that and we can actually take every little bit of data that we have on them, all the monitoring we've done, all the change notifications that they've sent,
Hmm.
or if they've had no changes, and we can demonstrate that they still match an equivalent of when we onboarded them and they're meeting their KPIs and
Hmm.
requirements, then tell me why we would need to go.
Very good. Very good. I like it. Um, you One of the things we're going to talk about, you mentioned this earlier, is are we picking the right people?
Mm.
Um, in the same vein, is this question coming from a place of evolution or improvement? I'm guessing it's a little bit of the two, but can you comment on that?
Yeah. So, one of the key things that we do at Thermo Fisher, when we're looking at it previously, when I started my career auditing 25 plus years ago, it really was, here, David, here's a checklist and, go out to the supplier and make sure you answer every one of these questions and we should be good.
Mhm.
And okay, you go out, now we've really tried to understand the profile of our auditor versus the profile of our supplier.
Mhm.
So let me explain that in a little bit. So when we're looking at auditors and we're looking at the commodities or the categories that they're well versed in, so we're looking at, let me back up a little bit. When we're looking at an auditor, we're looking at how strong they are in different standards, regulations, 1345, 9001, GMP, whatever it might be,
Mhm.
FDA. We're also looking at their category expertise, meaning how strong are they in plastics? How strong are they in
Full
biochemicals,
finish.
chemicals,
Yeah.
all one of those? Because one of the key things that we do at Thermo Fisher is we look at the profile of the supplier, what standards they have, what category they're in, even what region they're in, so we can
Mhm.
understand our geographic placement of
Mhm.
auditors versus our auditor.
Mhm.
Are they strong in 1345? Are they strong in those regulations? Are they strong in those categories? Like, for instance, I'll pick on plastics. If you send an auditor who is strong in plastics and understands the manufacturing process for plastics, they're going to give you a better audit than somebody who doesn't know plastics at all.
Mhm.
You're going to know what to look for. And that's been
Right.
some of the evolution that we've seen and some of the improvement that we've seen. So, really hiring specific auditors to handle a handful of categories that they're pretty well versed in. You're not going to get a chemist to be a very good, well, you can be obviously, but uh, to audit, machining or milling, you're going to send them to the lab suppliers. So really understanding those profiles is very important to us.
Mhm. Well, I think it's very, I mean, this whole topic is very important to you in particular because I've seen the Thermo Fisher catalog. Do you have hundreds or thousands of suppliers?
Oh, we have thousands of suppliers, the tens of
Tens of
thousands of
thousands?
tens
That's
of thousands of
wild.
suppliers across the globe.
That is
And
wild.
we sell over 1 million different SKUs,
That is crazy. Yeah, that's a lot. That's a lot.
a tremendous amount.
So, let's talk about pre-pandemic, post-pandemic. Give me your 2 cents on how things have changed.
Yeah, pre-pandemic, we were of the vein, and remember Thermo Fisher, we have 8 different groups, so we have every different commodity under the sun, if you will. So, we're a business that has grown by acquisition. So when we're bringing in new companies, we're bringing in their ways of doing things, their processes, and pre-pandemic, kind of across the board, the focus was always to travel to suppliers and make sure we're getting in our X amount of audits every single year, and very important to focus on, did we complete the checklist and did we
Mm,
did we finish those?
mm,
Pandemic wise, we realized we still need to have those evaluations in place. And that kind of turned a lot, as with everybody, turned to kind of that remote auditing and really how did we get good at that. Now coming out of the pandemic and transitioning out of that is how are we auditing smarter? Are we auditing the right people? And then transitioning to that kind of that exception based combined with that risk based approach and understanding, the suppliers and then who's going to the supplier. Does it make sense that, I'm going, or Nick, does it make sense that you're going, and understanding because we are such a global company, we have our supply base all over the world. So we really look at our auditor base and understand, if someone is in, Europe versus do they need to take a flight to the US when we could actually probably find someone in the US to perform that audit. So really we have driven to a more harmonized approach in our auditor criteria, our auditor qualifications. And in that case, because Thermo Fisher is such a diverse company, previous, if I wanted somebody else to perform an audit, they had to actually train to my system, use my templates from my
Hmm.
business, even though we're saying the same Thermo Fisher. But it was a lot of red tape in order to do that. So we're breaking down those barriers in order to help share suppliers and have a little bit more of a collaborative effort between businesses within Thermo Fisher.
Are there any risks associated with the breaking down of those barriers?
Absolutely. I mean, it does come to product kind of awareness, because auditors now know it's when we're looking at a supplier, what product are they giving us? So really understanding the criticality of that material going into our end product. So some of the risk when we're doing that is not knowing the changes at the supplier and how that can impact the finished product. So if you're doing it, just as a I don't want to say a guest auditor, that's probably the best way to put it, but you know, do you understand the impact on the final product of your sister site that might be halfway around the world? So sometimes you lose a little bit of that visibility.
Mm. So it sounds like, the part of the risk mitigation is due to making sure you have the correct people making those decisions. Are there any systems in place to further mitigate that risk?
So one of the key things that Thermo Fisher that I had when I started with them just under about 6 years ago was that there was no actual communication between the different sites.
Hmm.
So looking to understand, so one of the key things that we did was we built essentially a centralized audit portal just to understand who's going where and what auditors we have within our organization.
Great.
Before that, we never knew. And
Oh boy.
a lot of times too, Nick, is we had folks that are quality engineers, quality managers, where a portion of their job was to do supplier quality. So understanding those different folks and who was even an auditor within Thermo Fisher.
Mm. Yeah. Okay, great. I want to transition into socioeconomic and geopolitical factors.
Mm.
Why don't I just leave that wide open and broad? Can you discuss that and comment on that?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think one of the key things is, supplier quality works very closely with our global procurement organization. you know, Obviously with a lot of, pandemic, when you're trying to do some near sourcing and trying to understand, kind of the supply chain and the supply chain resilience, the 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 global business or manufacturing dynamics have just changed significantly from pre-pandemic, during pandemic, and now coming out of it. Obviously, when we're taking a look at suppliers, our global procurement does an amazing job of looking at the supplier risk in terms of where they are located. Are they in war zones, or are they near some political hotbeds, if you will, or are they near areas that could have potential natural disasters that, as this is happening, we need to reroute, and maybe find alternate suppliers. So that puts a huge burden on supplier quality, because now when we're looking at our single source or we're looking at our sole source, and now understanding that, we've kind of have everything in place, hey, we need to go and we need to find another supplier,
Mhm.
and then they might be the backup supplier, they might be a tertiary supplier, but we need to make sure that we're evaluating them in the same vein that we're doing, supplier A.
Mm.
In addition to that, it's not now with the different administrations going on and the different
Mhm.
tariffs, our
I was
global
just going to
procurement
go there. Yeah.
our global procurement organization is looking to see where we can understand how we can strengthen our supply base in terms of getting product on time and at a good cost. And that's even yet another pressure that global procurement puts on, is we want to get that best price for that SKU and we want it on time, and we want it, quickly,
Right.
and we want to be able to be flexible and nimble with that. In
Yeah.
the med device and the pharmaceutical world, not so easy.
Yeah. Well,
You can't just change suppliers that quickly.
yeah, they say price, quality, speed, pick two.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's exactly it.
Yeah.
And what we're working with our suppliers at, and something I had done at a previous place, was really look at the supplier pricing index of a supplier. What that means is their quality level on the product that they're giving us. So like if they are providing product that is not good, so obviously we had to put money into that to mitigate that and to remediate poor quality when it comes in the door. Are we, because of their poor quality, spending extra? So if they were spending $1 on the component and we're spending an extra 10 cents per component because of their poor quality, the pricing index is really 1.1. And so what are we really spending on that total cost versus what's just the piece price coming from global procurement? So having those conversations with procurement is eye-opening
Hmm.
sometimes.
Pardon my ignorance. The pricing index, is that an external thing or is that an internal thing?
So that was actually something that we're looking to see how we can implement within Thermo Fisher in different sites. It
Okay.
was something that I had done at a previous location, and it really was a great tool to use with our manufacturing engineers, with our R&D folks, with our global procurement, and with quality. So it really gave us a good KPI of that supplier.
Yeah. And I would say, just listening to what you're saying, I think you're able to encapsulate true value by doing it that way, right?
Yeah,
Because if it's cost and, cost and quality versus, cost and quality, right? So you
yeah.
gotta, how do you balance those
How do
things?
you balance those?
So it sounds like that index helps with that. Um, Concerns regarding increasing requirements from various standards and regulations and how those are impacting manufacturers. Can you comment on that?
Yeah, Nick, I take a look at this in a couple of different ways too, because when you're really looking at, after you've set up and onboarded that supplier and understand the requirements of that supplier, that is such a key area for me. Understanding what you actually need from that supplier. You'll see some companies that will just say we're ISO 1345, so our suppliers shall be ISO 1345, and that's just not a reality. When you're going and when you look at the scope of 1345, it's med device, it's manufacturing or distribution of a medical device. When you're looking at that, and a supplier might be just giving you a component, might be giving you a little subassembly of that. That doesn't require 1345 because you, as a legal manufacturer of that med device product, now you are 1345. You're in scope of that. So I see some companies, I don't want to say get lazy because that's really not what I'm trying to say, but they'll just say, okay, they need to be 1345. So what happened in the landscape of suppliers is sometimes a lot of them wanted to become competitive. And they said, okay, if we become 13485, then we're going to attract more business.
Right,
And oh, by the way, we're also going to be 9001,
right.
two separate systems. And then oh,
But isn't
maybe
it in
we
the eye of the beholder, though? I mean, I see where you're coming
100%.
from, but
Mhm.
not everybody agrees with your perspective.
No. Oh, agreed. Agreed. And I recognize that. And but what I'm, from the perspective of the supplier, they want to always have that competitive advantage. And
Yeah,
they want to be able to say, hey, hey, look, we have a system that will help you. And a lot of times you're adding belts and suspenders. It might
yeah,
be a little bit too much. Do you have the basic requirements? Do you have the foundational principle requirements needed to produce this product for us?
yeah,
And that's where I think it goes back to that skill set of that auditor.
yeah,
Do these folks have their processes and their manufacturing in control and their systems to support in control?
yeah. I agree with you 100%. That's a very educated point of view. I must confess that we are doing a very similar thing to what you just discussed, which is we're creating an AI software. And if you were to do an evaluation, you would realize that it does not need to be Part 11 compliant.
Mm-hmm.
but we're going to make it Part 11 compliant
Mhm.
for that very reason, right? And
Yeah.
so, are we going to be wasting some money? Maybe not wasting. Um, are we going to be spending more money? We will be. But it's not designed for you. It's designed for the other people that maybe don't have that level of understanding and just giving
Mhm.
them some peace of mind. Um, so as things are changing, in terms of the landscape with supplier evaluations, what are some of the new skill sets and competencies that people need to look for in their auditors?
So, I think previously auditing was always in a very, I don't want to say siloed, but might be just a very niche skill set, if you will,
Mhm.
in looking at that. And now I think one of the key things that we're looking for in supplier auditors is the one that can actually understand more of the business. Understanding our interactions, which is really key between our individual functions within our company, and then how that translates to a supplier and
Mhm.
what do we really need from that supplier. And when I talk about, the auditor profiles and their skill sets in specific categories or specific standards, those are something that, when we looked at auditors previously, when we looked to hire them 15, 20 years ago, it was, do you know the standards? Have you done an audit? Can you talk with different folks and
Mhm.
summarize under pressure within a given time period? But now it's a lot more of how well are the interactions of all the different functions within our company affecting your company,
Mm.
and where are those touch points, and being able to assess that subjectively and quantifiably.
Yeah. You know, your approach is above average. And I can say that because, we talk to all sorts of different companies and help them with their audit programs. And, I would say there is a kind of a standard mindset, which is what you're talking about kind of pre-pandemic. And now you've moved into a very educated, well thought out, way of looking at this. I'm just curious. Because you're taking this approach, are there any results that you can point to, positive results with this new approach?
Yeah,
Or
so I think
not a new approach, but different approach.
yeah, so I think we're slicing the pie just a little bit differently, and
Hmm.
I think when we're looking at it, one of the things that we have actually done in some sections of our business is actually looked at what is the percentage of our supply base that is poor performing, right? And that's really a strong KPI that we can really begin to use. And we've seen a solid um, increase or decrease in the number of poor performing suppliers. And that's the strength of your supply base. So it wasn't just the critical suppliers. So we've seen some very good benefits from that. In addition to that, understanding kind of our when we have an audit request and assigning the right auditor to that supplier, we've really reaped some benefits because we found some very strong we found the correlation between sending the right person to understanding the true picture of that supplier, and it became almost that kind of predictive model, if you will, of, hey, we know the supplier is struggling here. Maybe it's time we start talking with our procurement folks and saying, "Yeah, this might be a time that we want to start either looking for another supplier or backup supplier." And so we have had instances where just getting there as supplier quality and kind of raising our hand and saying, hey, we might want to take a look at this. We've seen some strong benefits from that.
Excellent. What are some of the potential consequences of manufacturers pushing down unnecessary standards to suppliers, and how does that affect the supplier's operational and financial burdens?
Yeah, so again, it goes back to that, when you start pushing down these different requirements, and you have to remember too, I mean, put yourself in, when you're looking at requirements that you need to impose on a supplier, you have to remember you're 99% of the time, you're not the only customer. So they
Right.
have a lot of other customers that they need to manage as well too. So, if you start taking in, Thermo Fisher or any, other customer B, customer C, customer D, and you have to do it each different way for each different customer, does that make a lot of sense? And
Mm,
now you're just imposing costs on this because now they need to add resources. They might need to add systems. And if, when they're looking at it, are you imposing that level of inefficiency to a supplier that's actually hurting them and a lot more burden? And when you're introducing burden, you're introducing non-compliance because a lot of times they might not follow what you say, and now all of a sudden, now it's an issue for you. And
mm,
now, you begin to look and understand what that effect is when you start pushing down requirements. So I talked about before looking at the base and principal requirements that you need to send, that you need to transfer to a supplier.
mm.
Very key, and it's not just the product specifications. That's there. It's the other supporting requirements that can adversely affect suppliers at times and really introduce a high level of inefficiency to them.
Yeah, and I think one thing that doesn't get enough attention is I would call it the soft results of an approach like this, because it's people dealing with people at the end of the day. And if you have a manufacturer with a relationship with a supplier and it's well thought out, it's got this, great approach that I really like. Um, and there's that level of understanding that then you actually, and it's not cliche, you do grow this partnership, and there are intangible things that happen that really, I think, strengthen your ability to do your job. So when the supplier gets, and has an email or a call from Thermo Fisher, um, they're going to respond a little quicker. They're going
Mm.
to pay attention a little bit more versus the other one that, is pushing down all of this unnecessary stuff and "Oh, I'll get to them tomorrow," or, something like that. So, you know, I think a focus on quality compliance and, um, again, some people don't like the cliche partnership, but building that partnership, there are soft, intangible aspects that I think companies can benefit from. Um, ISO certifications, they're valuable. They only address part of the, company supplier relationship. How can companies ensure that their suppliers consistently meet contractual requirements and deliver quality products on time?
So I've been kind of, I don't want to say struggling with this throughout my career, but understanding kind of the value of those ISO certificates. When they're
Mhm.
going in, they're looking at, you know, ISO standards, and they're
Mhm.
looking at one snapshot in time and saying, yes, we're going to give you a certificate, or no, you might be conditional, or we might look at this a little bit different. So they're really looking at the QMS, the structure, the products or the commodity that they produce, but it's not my product. And so it really comes down to that little bit of a disconnect. So it's the yes, you have that one pillar, if you will, that they have their QMS in place
Mm,
and it works, and you have the structure in place, and you have the management responsibility in place. That's great. How does that work for me? And it goes back to that question all the time. What's in it for me? As
mm,
Thermo Fisher, as a supplier, great. You have an ISO certificate. Can you make the product that we're asking you to make, or that you're producing? So while it is a good foundation, in my opinion, I think a lot of the times, adding on that material or that product that you're getting from a supplier is really key. And then you add on everything else that we were talking about too, all the different requirements, the systems that a supplier needs to use. ISO doesn't really focus on that. And it doesn't focus on all the different customers that a supplier might have. But you're going to really look at it. That's why I think it's a good foundation, but I don't think it's the end all be all. And you can't check the box and say, well, you have an ISO certificate, so that's good enough for me. And I think you really need to look at the relationship in total.
yeah. Well, this has been a truly good podcast. I really hope that the people listening to this podcast are getting and focusing on what you've said, because it really is, I think, the direction that people need to be going. So before we close, what would you like to leave the audience with?
Nick, as we were talking today, as we begin to look and evolve with companies and how companies are growing or companies are shrinking, we need to be smart about how we are looking and doing our jobs. How are we interacting with other functions within our organization? Are we making the best decision for Thermo Fisher in this case? So I really think when you're looking at it, not just from a a people perspective or a process perspective, but you're looking at it holistically. And I think anything that we can bring in that's essentially kind of quantifiable and remove some of that subjectivity, but understanding that it's going to be there,
Mm,
I think is key. And really putting the right people in the right place to succeed.
yeah.
And I think you can use that for any organization or any function within your organization. But I think it's really key for supplier quality, because we're a lot of times we're that bridge to that supplier into the business. And in like a lot of times it's a checkpoint that needs to go through. So, you understand the importance of our job as supplier quality, and how it supports the overall mission and objective of Thermo Fisher.
Yeah. Well, David, this has been excellent. I really appreciate you taking the time to join me today and share your insights.
Thanks for
Um,
having me, Nick.
Absolutely. And for everybody listening, as always, if you find conversations like this valuable, please share it with a colleague or your professional network. If you haven't already, subscribe to get updates of new episodes at thefdagroup.com/podcast, and follow the FDA Group on LinkedIn. If you'd like to connect about project or resource needs, head over to thefdagroup.com to get in touch, or feel free to connect with me personally on LinkedIn. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we will see you all next time.